Imagine the heavy wooden doors of the Lateran Basilica slowly creaking open. The air inside is thick, suffocating, filled with the overwhelming scent of burning incense, desperately trying to mask another smell. A smell that doesn't belong in a holy place. The smell of rotting flesh. At the far end of the grand hall, lit by the flickering glow of hundreds of candles, sits a golden throne. And on that throne, dressed in the most magnificent, jewel-encrusted robes of the highest holy office, sits a corpse. Its eye sockets are empty. Its skin is decaying. Its head, wearing the papal tiara, slumps unnaturally to the side. Across from it stands the current pope, his face twisted in absolute rage, screaming accusations at the dead man. This isn't a scene from a dark fantasy movie. This isn't a myth. This is absolute, documented history. Welcome to Unspoken History, where we uncover the darkest, most twisted secrets humanity has tried to bury. Today we are taking you back to the year 897 AD, into the heart of the Saculum Obscurum, the dark age of the papacy. We are going to witness the most macabre, disturbing, and bizarre legal proceeding ever conducted, the Cadaver Synod. To understand how a dead man ended up on trial, we first have to understand who he was, and why he was so deeply hated. The corpse on the throne belonged to Pope Formosus. But during his life, Formosus was no ordinary priest. He was a brilliant, highly influential Bishop of Porto, a man who successfully spread Christianity into Bulgaria. He was charismatic, politically sharp, and deeply ambitious. But in 9th century Rome, ambition was a dangerous game. At this time, the papacy wasn't just a religious institution. It was the ultimate seat of political power in Europe. Popes commanded armies, crowned emperors, and controlled unimaginable wealth. Rome was a snake pit of rival aristocratic families, all murdering and poisoning each other to get their puppet on the papal throne. Formosus had made powerful enemies early on. In fact, years before he became pope, he was accused of treason and excommunicated by a previous pope, John VIII. Formosus had to flee Rome in the dead of night just to survive. But Formosus was a survivor. He waited in the shadows. Years passed. Popes died, some of them assassinated in highly suspicious ways, and the political winds shifted. Formosus was pardoned, returned to Rome, and against all odds, in the year 891, he was elected pope. But his reign was a nightmare of political warfare. Europe was torn between two massive warring factions, the Carolingians of Germany and the Spoleto family of Italy. Formosus played a deadly game of chess between them. He initially crowned the Spoleto leader as emperor, but then secretly invited the German king, Arnulf, to march on Rome and overthrow them. The Spoletos, especially their fierce and ruthless empress, Agiltrude, never forgot this betrayal. They swore absolute vengeance against Formosus. But before they could exact their revenge, Formosus died of a stroke in 896. He had escaped them. Or so he thought. Following Formosus's death, Rome fell into absolute chaos. The papacy was a revolving door of assassinations. The next pope lasted only 15 days before he died under mysterious circumstances. Then, the Spoleto family finally seized control. They placed their own man on the throne, Pope Stephen VI. Stephen was a fanatic. He was completely under the control of the Spoleto empress, Agiltrude, who was thirsting for revenge against the dead Formosus. But there was another, more selfish reason Stephen needed to destroy his predecessor's legacy. Stephen himself had a massive legal problem. He had been made a bishop by Formosus. But according to the strict laws of the church at the time, a bishop could not be promoted to pope. Therefore, Stephen's own papacy was technically illegal. Stephen needed a loophole. He realized that if he could prove Formosus was an illegal, fake pope, then everything Formosus ever did would be erased. The laws he passed? Cancelled? The bishops he appointed? Void. But how do you legally strip a man of his titles when he is already resting in his grave? For Pope Stephen VI, the answer was horrifyingly simple. You dig him up and you put him on trial. It had been 7 months since Formosus took his final breath. 7 months of lying in the cold, damp earth of Rome. By Stephen's orders, soldiers were sent to the crypt. They smashed open the tomb and dragged the decaying body out. The stench of death immediately filled the air. The corpse was limp, deteriorating, crawling with the reality of death. But they didn't just bring the body to the court. Stephen ordered the corpse to be bathed. Imagine the grotesque horror of the servants forced to wash a 7-month-old rotting corpse. Then they dressed him. They wrapped the dead, stiff limbs in the finest silk papal vestments. They put the sacred ring on his bony finger, and they placed the papal crown upon his decaying head. They carried this horrific effigy into the Lateran Basilica and propped it up on the throne. The doors were locked. The cardinals, bishops, and priests of Rome were forced to sit in the audience and witness the madness. Nobody dared to speak out against Stephen. They sat in terrified silence, breathing through rags to block out the overwhelming smell of the dead pope. The Synodus Horrenda, the macabre synod, began. Pope Stephen VI paced back and forth in front of the rotting corpse, pointing his finger, screaming at the top of his lungs. "When you were Bishop of Porto, why did you usurp the universal Roman See in such a spirit of ambition?" He roared at the lifeless body. "But a trial requires a defense. And this is where the story goes from dark to utterly absurd. Stephen had ordered an 18-year-old deacon to act as the corpse's defense attorney. This poor young man was forced to crouch behind the throne of the dead man. Trembling, sweating with absolute terror, he had to speak for the corpse. Every time Stephen screamed a question, the whole room fell into a deathly silence, waiting for the corpse to answer. And the teenage deacon, hiding behind the rotting flesh, would stutter out a weak, pathetic defense. "Because I was evil," he would cry out on behalf of Formosus. "Because I was blinded by ambition." It was a theater of madness. Unsurprisingly, the corpse lost the case. Formosus was stripped of his beautiful papal robes and left in dirty rags. But Stephen wanted more. He ordered his guards to chop off the dead pope's 3 blessing fingers. The mutilated body was then dragged away and thrown into the Tiber River. But karma came quickly. Right after the verdict, a massive earthquake struck Rome. The terrified public, believing God was furious, reached their breaking point. A massive riot erupted. The mob stormed the palace, stripped Pope Stephen of his own robes, and threw him into a dark dungeon. Just months later, he was strangled to death in his cell. Eventually, Formosus's body was recovered and peacefully restored to St. Peter's Basilica. The Cadaver Synod remains a chilling reminder that sometimes the true monsters in history aren't hiding in the dark. They are sitting on thrones. If this deep dive kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment below. Until next time, in Unspoken History, the dead always have a story to tell.